Derek Kitchen, welcome to Elevate Utah. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks, Jackie. It's good to be back with you.
I can't believe it. This is a reunion of sorts because you were one of the very first candidates that we worked on. We actually credit your campaign as one of the reasons that our company exists. In 2022, we started your campaign for Senate.
That's right. It was a competitive race in 2022, and Jackie and Gabby and Ben and Zoe and all of the volunteers that we pulled together really came in and supported me in a way that I really needed as a candidate. And I'm so grateful, not only for your work then, but what you've done since. And I'm so proud of you guys.
No, thank you. Well, we're very excited to talk to you as one of the first candidates who has left the race for the Congressional District in Utah, and I can't wait to get into it and talk about all of the details and tea. But in the meantime, will you just introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, tell us your story from the city council to congressional campaign.
Absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity. Well, I'm a Utah boy. I grew up here in Salt Lake Valley and came out of the closet when I was quite young. And in the early 2000s, being a young gay kid in Salt Lake was awkward, to say the least. Grew up as a Mormon kid, and so was bumping into a lot of, cultural and familial issues. And so I found myself out on my own very at a young age. And as much as it was tough at the time, it built a strong character around me and in my body and in my mental space and my ability to I guess take care of myself, but also see the bigger picture and move towards something greater. And so I was really proud to put my name on a lawsuit in 2013, which was my entry point into politics here in Utah.
Big deal.
When I sued then Governor Gary Herbert in federal court and claimed that Utah's ban on marriage equality violated the U.S. Constitution. And I'm 24 years old at the time, right? And so,
Wow, I didn't realize you were that young.
yeah, I was just a young punk, right? Like for real, just like shaking shit up. And a lot of organizations were really nervous about Utah being the first state to file a federal case, and so I got a lot of excitement and encouragement from the community there, but also a lot of hesitation from the national groups. We obviously ended up moving forward with the case either way, and it made Utah the first state in the country to legalize marriage equality through the federal courts and created that very important case law that ultimately led to legal marriage equality nationwide about 18 months after my case. And so, as a young guy here in Salt Lake going through the federal courts, it gave me a platform. It elevated me in the community, not only to speak on my own relationship and the importance of equality under the law, but to speak on a matter that had such wide-ranging impacts even beyond my own personal life, right? I'll never forget people coming up to me and saying, like, you don't know me, Derek, but what you did changed my life and allowed me and my partner to get married. And now we adopted our children and we're so proud. And I think that really, for me, lit a fire in terms of like what I saw as possible in the world, given Utah's history around marriage equality and sort of the Mormons' reluctance to embrace gay people. It felt really empowering to be that first domino on such an important issue for so many families in the LGBTQ community. So when the case came to an end, I ran for city council in Salt Lake City, 2015. And won. It was a very competitive race, but joined the city council after a successful campaign and really loved city council. I mean, this is bread and butter politics. If you're concerned about schools or potholes or whether or not your power comes on when you turn on the light switch, those are all, for the most part, municipal questions. And so I love city government.
Work,
it really is. And, the thing is, Jackie, as a council member, you can make a decision in a council meeting on a Tuesday night, and by that weekend, you can see it in action. And so that there's a tactical side of government that you only get at the local level. And so really was so proud to do what I was able to do on the city council. And then in 2018, Jim DeBacchus, former state senator, had announced that he was not going to run for re-election, and it left an opening in the state senate. And so I received a lot of encouragement from the business community and my neighbors and folks at the farmers market to throw my hat in the ring for the state senate. And so in 2018, I ran another very competitive race, and
That's actually where we first met.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, and also keep in mind, that was when we had all of the ballot initiatives.
Yes.
Prop 4, of course, which
Yeah.
we can talk about here.
Big year.
But also, the Medicaid expansion and medical cannabis. And then there was a question about education that was on the ballot that cycle as well. 2018 was a big year for Democrats and
Massive.
left of center folks in the state of Utah. And so I rode that wave in my primary and prevailed and joined the Utah legislature as a member of the upper chamber, one of 6 Democrats out of 29 senators in total, and really loved that work. It was much different than the city council. The city council is technically nonpartisan, 7-member body. The state senate, of course, 29 members and very, very partisan. And so it was a different side of politics. And I like the work, but in the Senate, you have to figure out how to get things done in a very hostile environment. And so that forces creativity in terms of the legislative process and how you build relationships and what you choose to advance and what you choose to quietly set aside for a future day, right? And so it's an exercise in priorities and values. And so, and then I ran for re-election in 2022 in a brand new Senate district because, as you know, the reapportionment happened in 2021. And so I was serving in District 2 and ran in District 9. There was a fair amount of overlap, but it was a brand new set of voters to engage with. And that was also a very tough race.
Yeah.
And this is where you and I really got to know each other. We ran the funny thing is 2022, it was my 3rd political race. I raised more money than I'd ever raised. I was better on all the issues than I'd ever been. I had higher name ID, more trust in the community. I was, by all measures, a much better candidate. And I still came up short by 60 votes. And man, that was a tough loss.
That was
personally.
a tough one. It was a really tough one for everyone. And I also think, I want to talk more about this, but there were so many other dynamics going on that year between the Roe decision, between the amount of people that were registered as Republicans voting in the Republican primary, especially in that district, and things that honestly we couldn't control for on the campaign. And I feel like we ran an incredibly creative and interesting and innovative campaign. And at the end of the day is very hard to deal with.
We worked longer hours on that campaign than I'd ever worked.
Yep.
I called more voters, raised more money, and we had more fun.
We did.
On that campaign.
We had a lot of fun.
It was the funnest campaign I'd ever been on.
Yeah.
You said creativity. We were so freaking creative.
We
I
were.
mean, remember we brought out Jim Obergefell
Yeah.
and we opened up bill files and we pushed the needle on everything that we could. And I'm really proud to have been a part of that. So thank you.
Well, I'm excited for where you've been since and all of the other things to talk about. But I want to get into what it was like being in the Senate, because you came into the Senate as the only openly queer legislator and the youngest legislator. Oh. And what was that like, especially that first session? Did people take you seriously? How were you able to approach relationships in the Senate and going about that lawmaking that you had already seen on the city council, but was so different here?
You're right, because the Senate is very partisan. I did join as the youngest member in the Senate at the time, and the only out person in the whole legislature, 104 members in the Utah legislature between the House and the Senate. And so I felt a great deal of responsibility to make sure that members of the LGBTQ community were well represented, and that the issues that were mostly pushed by Republicans to attack our community were met with enough resistance and power and respect that it maybe would allow some of these Republicans to question their votes. I found that at first, a lot of the rural, predominantly male Republican senators were not sure what to make of me because they had seen me on the news, for a number of years before that with the marriage case and everything. And I think they had this idea that I was just the gay marriage dude, right? Which I am, sure. But I found very quickly that when you have sidebar conversations, you grab a cup of coffee or you walk with them in the hallway, call them up, after 5 p.m. and have just a chit chat while they're driving from the Capitol down to San Juan County or Utah County or what have you, that they really respected the candid one-on-one conversation. And so that became my strategy for my whole time in the Senate was to, I may not be able to persuade David Hinkins on a natural resources issue that really mattered to me in my bleeding environmentalist heart, right? But at least I had enough trust with him that he would take my call and talk me through his position and allow me to talk through mine. And so I found that it was never a fruitless endeavor to build relationships. And when I ended up losing my race in 2022, the Republicans were the kindest to me. And it wasn't because they wanted me out, it's because they knew they were going to miss me.
Yeah.
And so, when I left the Senate and went on to serve former President Joe Biden in the administration, primarily focused on global trade, my job was to work with Congress, members of Congress, and state legislators all over the country. And so I had a portfolio that included a lot of Republicans, right? And so one thing that I found as a lesson from my time in the Senate was go everywhere, speak to everyone, and really try to build a big coalition, especially when you're trying to advance a specific issue,
Yeah. How did you use that to actually pass bills? I don't know, this is a thing we hear from legislators a lot about that I think most normal people don't get to see behind the scenes. And you see the dramatic floor debates or you see what it's like in a committee hearing, but you don't get to see what relationships are happening behind the scenes or what text messages are being sent to people. And ultimately, those are the things that decide whether or not bills pass or fail, I think. And how did you see that actually show up in you being able to pass bills or not pass bills?
Well, this is the part of politics that the average citizen doesn't really see, right? Because it's done in committee work. It's done in the sidelines when a bill is being drafted. And so obviously the legislature runs for 45 days a year, and that's where the meat and potatoes of policymaking happens. But it's during what we call interim, which is, every day outside of the 45-day session where committees meet, small groups get together to have policy-based discussions, and where lawmakers hatch ideas for what could become future legislation. And so, part of that is, as a lawmaker, an elected official, you want to listen to your community and sponsor legislation that's relevant to your voters, because that's your job as a representative. But part of it as well is to pay enough attention to what's going on among your fellow legislators so that if you see that, I don't know, a lawmaker from Tooele is running legislation that's going to impact the Salt Lake International Airport or the University of Utah, right, that you have enough of a trustworthy relationship with that lawmaker that you can pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, this is going to negatively impact a big stakeholder in my district. Can we talk about the language? And so then you can go, work with the drafting attorney, you can work with stakeholder groups, you can work with Republican leadership and flag issues. And so, this is where building relationships is actually one of the most important things, because while I did pass legislation and have some, sponsored bills make it all the way to the governor's desk, I would say most of my success in the Senate was quiet, right? It's done behind the scenes, making a bad bill less bad or making a good bill even better, right? And so, those are things that you need to do as a leader. It's hard to do when you're in the minority party because you don't have a lot of leverage when you don't have the numbers. And I'll make a pitch for it here. Coming out of the Senate, it's really important for those Utahns who care about balanced government, good decision making, an open, transparent debate on issues that impact everybody. It's really important that we break the supermajority in Utah so that we can, prevent a veto override session from the legislature, for example, or again, work on the budget matters that are really important. And I think that breaking the supermajority in the Senate, we just need to pick up 4 seats.
Yeah.
In the House, I think it's 14 seats.
Yeah.
If we can pick up 14 House seats, we will break the supermajority in the House and have some real weight to throw around in the legislature. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. This congressional seat is awesome. I'm so proud of all the Prop 4 folks and everybody that gathered signatures and showed up to vote for fair maps. I'm obviously proud of the groups that sued the legislature to make it so that they had to listen to the voters. And it's important that we have a congressional seat right now. But long term, if we're talking power in the state of Utah, we've got to break the supermajority in the legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about that all the time, and it's our entire goal, especially before 2030 and the next redistricting cycle. I think if we can get that power so that going into redistricting, we have committee assignments, we have enough of a less of a supermajority to be able to have some control to stop the bad stuff, that is where it's going to really matter, I think.
I think that's right.
You were able to work behind the scenes to do that relationship building, to actually pass the bills. But you also, I think, I don't want to ignore that you were a very outspoken advocate in the Senate. And I remember you standing up and getting cut off by the president and really standing up for the things that you believed in when it came time to do that. And what did that look like, having to balance those two things, balancing the relationships behind the scenes while also doing the loud, proud Democrat thing while representing one of the most progressive districts in the state?
It is a fine line, and thank you for noticing. As an observer, I really appreciate that, because you're right. You know, we need to get things done. That's what we're elected to do. And we have a structural challenge where we don't have the numbers to really beat back the bad things. And so sometimes just grabbing the mic and using your voice is the only thing you can do. And so I don't want to discount the importance of raising your voice and using the platform that you have. But that being said, you have to be discerning, because if that's all you do, people learn to tune you out and they don't listen to what you actually have to say. So it really, being an elected official is a matter of prioritization and what is really relevant and important to speak on right now versus what can we put to the side and pick up in a week or 2 or 5 and workshop that a little more quietly. And so I found that it was a fine line to walk.
Yep. I think that's a good transition into the congressional district. When that redistricting map came down at, what time was it, 11:45, and we saw that District 1 was going to be entirely within Salt Lake County and likely a Democratic district, I'm curious, what was your thought process in that moment, and what did you feel when you first saw that map?
Well, I cracked a bottle of champagne, and we celebrated a very historic win on behalf of voters in the state of Utah. And this cuts across party lines, by the way. We're talking Republicans, independents, libertarians, Democrats, people from all walks of life voted for fair, independent maps in 2018. And it took us 8 years
finally
to get there. And so there was a catharsis, right? And a celebratory environment. And so I was just thrilled and really proud of the judiciary. And keep in mind, again, I got my start in politics going through the judicial process with my lawsuit. And so I saw a parallel thing here, which is you got to go through the process, the legislative process and the signature gathering process and all of that. But sometimes you got to lean on that third branch of government. We have a rule of law for a reason in this country, and oftentimes it is the final backstop. And in this case, the judges have protected the rights of voters.
Check, yeah.
They have been the only check here. So I'm just proud. So that was my first thought. And then as I sort of began to look at the district a little more closely over the next day or two, realized, wow, this hits awfully close to home for me. Not only does my entire former state Senate district nest within the new congressional seat, occupying about 1/3 of the new congressional seat and the most dense and urban part. But my childhood home was in the southern part of the district. My high school was in the southern part of the district. My grandma and my cousins and my nieces and nephews and my whole family live in this new congressional district. And so, I just remember thinking, man, this feels like a cozy seat, something that feels real to me. Memories from my childhood started coming back and realizing, oh man, we could actually have somebody like me representing my community. And so for me, I thought very quickly, but with as clear a head as possible about this district, and realized my voice is needed in this debate, in this conversation. And not only that, I have a real chance of winning, given that it's such a strong Democratic district, that thinking about the things that I fought for over the last 10 years in politics and government, I don't have to shroud them or explain any of those positions. I get to walk into this congressional race proud of everything that I've done before and amplify the big vision for what's possible when Democrats have power. And so it was a real joy to be involved for the 4 months that I was exploring the race.
You're no stranger to a competitive, especially progressive Democratic primary race, but this has been a very crowded field. But I'm curious, you've spent a lot of time with these other candidates, and what do you think about the field of candidates and what it looks like for the future of this congressional district?
You're right, it's a crowded field, and we have a lot of candidates vying for this seat. What that says to me is that there has been a pent-up political energy in our community, and this is the first time in decades that we have an opportunity to have a true blue Democrat represent Salt Lake County. And so you see folks from the labor community, you see teachers and folks from a lot of different backgrounds trying to see themselves in this role. You know, I look at Kathleen Reavy, she's a teacher. I served with her in the Senate. I know her style. She's a strong leader. I see Ben McAdams, somebody I worked with over the last 10, 12 years. He's an effective leader. My buddy, Laban, he lived in D.C. when he worked at TikTok, and he and I have become dear friends, and I see the power that he brings to a conversation of holding corporations accountable. Luis, strong, young father, ready to advance the labor agenda, so important to the democratic value system. Ava holds the city council seat that I once held, and back to what I said earlier, decisions that you make on a Tuesday matter later that week. And so I'm proud of the candidates, and I like all of the ones that I just mentioned. And so I think that there's a real opportunity to send a strong, accomplished leader to Washington this year, and I'm excited to be a part of that process on the outside.
Okay, so the question that everybody is asking, tell us the tea. Why didn't you file?
Where's my tea? Well, look, candidly speaking, a lot of personal and community considerations went into my decision. Over the last 4 months, I've spoken to thousands of voters. I've been out there gathering signatures and meeting with a variety of groups in the community. And one thing is clear is that they're ready for change, but they're also ready for competence and stability and somebody that will effectively advance their agenda in Congress. And while I do believe that I can do that very well, I saw the race getting crowded and messy. And I think it's important to have the courage to look at a dynamic with clear eyes and a vision for what's possible, even if it's not today, but what's possible in the future. And for me, it feels like the right time for me to gather some strength, support good candidates that I believe in. There's a lot of candidates up and down the ballot, House district candidates, state Senate candidates. There's a lot of county council races that are really important for Democrats in Utah right now. And so I saw a unique opportunity to step aside, use my experience and my vast network of relationships to help the good guys and the good girls win their primaries this year.
I appreciate that for so many reasons. I think as someone who's worked in campaigns and elections for so long, especially behind the scenes, so much of that work is just so important. And similar to what you do legislating, it can make or break the results. And we want to make sure that having people behind the scenes to do that work and having a combination of both the leaders that are out front, but also people that are willing to actually put in the work, actually put in the time, knock the doors, is so important. And I've seen you do that. I know you've done that, and I am excited that you're going to continue to be able to do that this year.
I appreciate that, Jackie. And again, this was never about me as a person, but it is about the district, and the stakes are so high right now.
Are you going to endorse a candidate in this race, or how are you feeling about that decision now?
I've always believed that if you have strong convictions and a desire for effective outcomes, that you can't sit on the sidelines.
Absolutely.
And so I've always been surprised when Democrats will quietly say who they like, but publicly stay completely silent. And so that's a long answer of saying I will be endorsing somebody in this race. I do think that there is a couple points in the next couple weeks that will possibly change the dynamics in the race. And so I'm thinking that maybe mid-April I will have the opportunity to come out strong for somebody that I believe in. But I want to do it in a way that allows me to bring all of my community that I've built over the last 15 years in politics and try to bring us together around a candidate and a vision. Because again, this is about building a coalition It's building capacity and making sure that when we win this seat, the Democrat that is successful builds strength in the party. Mm-hmm. The Democrat that wins this primary in June will become the face of Democrats throughout the state of Utah. And so that's a really big responsibility for that candidate. And so I expect to be play a supportive and active supporting role in making sure that the right person wins.
I think there's a lot of interesting parallels between a number of the candidates, but I think a lot of people could say you're very similar to Nate in being an outspoken advocate in the Senate. You're very similar to Ben in your ability to get things done and to make progress, and you're the institution. You've been in Utah politics for so many years. Having Ava, a fellow queer person, running, I think there's so many different places where I feel like people might compare you or think Derek's supporters are going to go towards this candidate. And do you have any inclinations of what you think that will look like?
This is why I was such a compelling candidate. Because you're right, I do see a really wide lane for somebody like me that offers the comfort and the stability of knowing where the lights are in the house and how to turn on the dishwasher and when the trash collection comes, right? Like I know my way around Utah politics in a way that would allow me to be really effective in this role. And I know right from wrong, and I'm not afraid to call it out. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really important value for this district. But ultimately, I think that there's an opportunity for me to be even more effective in the background. And so that's why I am where I'm at.
I think one of the topics of this race in particular has been what makes a progressive, or do we need the most progressive person to represent this district because it's a Democratic district, because we've never seen a district like this before. And in your mind, what does a progressive actually mean to you in a Utah context? And does that actually equate to progress? And how do we make sure that we are voting for someone who is going to do both of those things?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of energy right now with the Trump administration and Republicans controlling both chambers in Congress. So there's a lot of energy to hold them accountable. And so you see a lot of folks stepping forward with loud voices. And I think it is important to raise your voice. But at the same time, if you can't do anything, then it's all for nothing, really. I mean, it might feel good to, yell into the wind on an issue. It might feel cathartic. Certainly I do that every legislative session,
You've
right?
done it.
But at the same time, in order to be a progressive, you have to have the ability to move progress forward. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a budget question, whether that's a policy question around, holding billionaires accountable and getting money out of politics, moving toward a single-payer healthcare system so that no American ever finds themselves waiting for critical life-saving healthcare needs. A lot of issues are really important to the progressive movement right now. And so we need to have somebody that is effective. I think of progress in terms of Harry Reid, for example, right? I mean, he flipped Nevada and made it a blue state long term. And it's because he was a effective, proven progressive, somebody who has big progressive ideas, a moral compass, and somebody who's unafraid to hold power accountable, but at the same time was smart enough and had the relationships to move progressive policy forward. So I think Utah, this district is a liberal progressive district, and it deserves somebody who will fight affirmatively for labor, for women's health care, right, for the environment, right, for holding Trump accountable, all of these things that are super important to progressives. But typing online as quickly as possible on every single thing and getting nothing done because you have zero trust with your colleagues, that's not progress, right? We only have 2 years in this seat, so you got to move fast. And so I think for me, I'm looking for a pragmatic progressive, a proven progressive, somebody who knows right from wrong and has the wherewithal to get something done. And so that might narrow down my choices a little bit in this race, but we'll get to that in the coming weeks.
You spent so much time in DC in your appointment, and you have an understanding of what the dynamics look like there, not only for the person that's going to get elected and then have to go to DC and represent Utah a very unique place in a very complicated political environment. But what does that mean for Utah, and what does it mean for that person that now will have that job in DC, holding up the Utah torch as the singular, potentially Democratic representative of our delegation?
Really important question. I was in a federal agency when Doge and Elon Musk and everybody was coming in and taking a hacksaw to the administrative branch of our government. And it was heartbreaking to see decades worth of work burned to the ground in a matter of days. We have an administrative system that is clunky at times, and I think that it's fair to critique government because it does move slow and it's oftentimes inefficient. But when you build up an administrative state that takes care of people and administers large programs and keeps us safe, look at the FAA, for example, right? We need to have TSA agents. We need to have credentialed pilots that keep us safe in the skies, as an example. We need to have an administrative state that is effective. And when you come in and cut it all down, we're all worse off for it as a country. We're all less safe because of that. And so I say all of that just as my experience in the federal government goes to suggest that we need to have a member of Congress that understands the interplay between the executive branch, where all of these administrative functions happen, and the role of Congress, which is primarily policy and money, right? And oversight. And so it's important that while Trump is still creating all of the chaos that he's creating right now, not just around the world, but here at home, that the one Democrat in Utah has the knowledge of how the system works so that they can effectively mitigate some of these challenges. You know, again, keep in mind Salt Lake County, whether it's for our health, whether it's for housing, whether it's for daycare, transportation funding, right? Those are oftentimes federal dollars that start in Congress and filter down to regional and state governments. And so I think having somebody in this position that understands the interplay between cities and the federal government, the county and the federal government, the state and the federal government, right? It's important that we have somebody that's proficient in policy. And again, this is where politics gets boring for people. We all get ginned up when it comes to the election. You know, we're all excited about our person and, you know, really eager to engage in the process. But after the election, oftentimes we kind of turn the TV off and shift our attention elsewhere. And so when it's all said and done, we need to make sure we have somebody who's a true blue policymaker looking out for the best interests of Utah.
Mm-hmm. Does working across the aisle with someone make you not a progressive?
I wouldn't say that. I think it's issue by issue these days. You know, even within the Democratic base, there's a lot of disagreement on issues, right? But if you can get AOC to agree with a conservative Republican in Oklahoma on one or two issues, there's no reason they should be at each other's throat for something that they agree on, right? And so I think it's really important that you work with your colleagues across the aisle. That doesn't mean that you need to work with them on everything, right? It doesn't mean that you support every bill that they propose or sign on to everything. But I'm not the kind of politician that is so binary about my relationships, right? Just because you're a Republican does not mean that I'm going to ignore you and not talk to you. That's not how a legislative body works. You have to work together. Now, if somebody's an idiot, I think it's fair to call them out on their BS, and we want to see that. But we also want to see collaboration. Look at Massey and Ro Khanna right now, right? On the Epstein files or on the War Powers Resolution. Americans deserve to have workhorses, not show ponies. And I think that that's what we expect out of Congress in this election cycle.
We call ourselves a big tent, but oftentimes we find that if people have the wrong answer on an issue, we cast them aside or we don't include them. And I guess my question is, for Utah voters who are going to make their decision in this primary, what do you recommend that they look at, and how do they go about evaluating these candidates who are all very similar on a lot of issues without implementing those purity tests? Or what should Utah voters be doing to make their decision who they vote for?
Well, there's a lot of energy around a lot of issues right now, and that's what a campaign is for. So I'm never upset when somebody's really passionate about one or two issues that they care deeply about. That's the point of a public campaign, to get everyday citizens involved in the process and to raise their concerns and have our politicians hear directly from them. It's a good thing to have debate and disagreement. That being said, you're right. The Democratic Party and the left of center movement generally, there's a lot of internal disagreement. And you do see candidates saying one thing off of the approved language, and Twitter or Threads or whoever online goes after you, right? I've been the target of many of these over the years. The unfortunate reality is that you immediately shut down the conversation, and people harden when they're canceled or called out aggressively online in terms of their purity on an issue. And I think about my mom or my school teachers or my cowboy cousins, right, that maybe don't listen to the same news sources, maybe don't engage in politics or policy in the same way that I do. If they have a different opinion, having a conversation is where the magic happens, right? And even if I can't persuade them, at least we've become closer as people. And again, we're in a really weird moment in society. We have this K-shaped economic recovery where the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. And so it's more about the class divide for me than it is purity tests around abortion or the environment or issue A, B, or C, right? I mean, it all matters, of course, but we've got to figure out a way to come together as people, as humans, to hold our government accountable, to hold corporations accountable, and to make sure that as the wealthiest country in the history of the universe, at home, we are well taken care of. And that if we're going to be paying taxes every year, that we have services that meet the need of people, and that we don't have kids in foster care rolling off without the kind of support that they deserve into adulthood, that we have young families with access to affordable childcare so that they can be productive working citizens in this society, that aging parents have an opportunity to age with dignity and close to their family and with a healthy diet. I mean, we have so many things that the average person deserves in this country and that we should be able to provide, given our economic might as a country, that we really have to come together, even if we're not all precisely in line on every single issue. I mean, I think about it this way, Jackie. I disagree with myself at times. Even the people who I care about most in my life, my partner, my mom, my siblings, we don't agree on everything, but we're on the same team.
Yeah.
And we got to move in the same direction. And so I'm all about trying to get folks to sing from the same sheet of music, even if we're at different tones.
Yeah, we tell people all the time, the only politician that's going to agree with you on 100% of the issues is yourself. Yeah. So you might as well run for office if that's what you want, but nobody else is going to have 100% of your views.
And on that note, if you're thinking about running for office, run, baby, run.
Yes. One more thing I want to mention in this race, and something that I have been talking about quite a lot. I think our fight for Prop 4 is one of the most important things that we are doing right now. And right now, it looks like Prop 4 is going to be on the ballot again this November. There's a chance that doesn't happen, but to your point earlier, we've seen the Utah legislature find a way around every single win we've had in the last few years, and who's to say they don't put another constitutional amendment or something on the ballot if this Prop 4 thing doesn't work. And I'm curious, I think this race is not only its own race, but it's also an example to the rest of the state of what is going on. And if we have to win that Prop 4 fight statewide and reaffirm our support for Prop 4 and fair districts, what does this race say about that fight, and how does it influence what's going to happen in that election or in our future elections?
The Democrat who prevails in the primary in June is going to become the face of Democrats in the state of Utah. And so it is very important that we run a strong congressional race into the general election, and that we are able to articulate to the general public as effectively as possible what's at stake and why fair districts matter. Yes, we've already voted on Prop 4, but that was 8 years ago. Yeah. Think about how quickly the news is moving these days. It's really important that we use this as an opportunity to re-engage the community at large on why it's so important to get money out of politics and to make sure that politicians are not choosing their voters, that it's the other way around, voters choosing their politicians. Mm-hmm. This is going to become a big public relations effort, voter engagement operation, and this is really where the coalition building goes, right? We need to get our healthcare advocates. We need to get the youth and new voters. We need to get the sandwich generation that are dealing with young kids and aging parents. Mm-hmm. We need to get our friends and family in our wards involved in a meaningful way, because this is about good government ultimately, and whether the government that we have is accountable and trustworthy and truly fighting for the interests of you and I, mm-hmm. and our neighbors and our family, and not just looking out for themselves in their own pocketbook. And that's the challenge with a supermajority rule, is that accountability disappears. And so this question on the ballot in November about whether or not we want independent redistricting, fair redistricting, it's an important one for the future of our state. Keep in mind, Utah's growing fast. We've got a lot of big challenges and opportunities on our hands. And so it's really important that we have strong Democratic leadership.
Yeah. And everything hinges on having fair districts, not only at the congressional level, but the state level too. Mm-hmm. And coming back to what you said about the supermajority, we won't be able to do that, I think, if we don't have Prop 4 and we don't have the ability to have fair districts and we have politicians protecting their own power over and over again.
You know, I speak to a lot of Republicans. I grew up in a Republican household. I'm just a cowboy from the West Side. Truly, you know, we raised buffalo and chickens and cattle growing up. And so the folks that I grew up around, they may have identified as Republican, but they are not emotionally Republicans. It's just the way it is, right? And so as I engage with the average Utah person that are just trying to make ends meet and take care of their family and live a good life, they all agree that accountability and balance in government is important, and that when you have a one-party rule, again, there's no accountability. And so I'm getting folks out there to realize that, you know, maybe I've never voted for a Democrat before, but I see the importance of this right now. And so I think this congressional district, even though it's rated very Democratic right now, we have an opportunity to make it even more Democratic by getting folks to cross over, getting independents to vote for the candidate, getting Republicans to choose for the first time in their life to cast a vote for a Democrat, and to make sure that we just have a strong showing this year. Because you're right, the ballot initiative is undermining the work that we've done as citizens in this state over the last decade, and it's our chance to remind the legislature they answer to us. We do not answer to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last question. What's next for you? What's next for Derek Kitchen?
I am proud to stay involved in Utah politics and will continue to build my business and to support good candidates and monitor the legislature to make sure that they're serving the people of this state right. But we've got to be building a bench, and I want to be a part of the future of this state, of this party. I've already served in city council. I've already been in the state senate. I've already been in the federal government. I've already sued the governor and won. I've done a lot, and so you can't get rid of me. But what's next is to be determined, and my focus is on helping voters and candidates build power here in Utah.
Can't wait to see what you do. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, our first guest.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
Really appreciate all the good information you're providing the people of this state. It's really valuable.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
We did it.
Good. Do you want to run over ask one more question again?